All right, so it's nice to see you all. My wife Donna and I, we planted our church in '09. So we've been there about 13 years or so. It's been a great journey. Before that, I did 20 years of youth ministry, okay? So that's a long time. You know what I mean? That's like longer than should happen probably. It probably shouldn't be that way, but it was for us. It was a great journey. It was a long journey. When we first started, in our context, we felt that the Lord told us that we needed to pastor an entire generation all the way through in our church. So, when the average, youth ministry span, at least down in the States, back then it was like 18 months, it's like 18 months. So, for us to think, okay, we need to do this for 20 years to finish what God's told us to do. So at the age of 27, 20, it was earlier than that, I guess, but 05, whatever I was, 27, we made a 20-year commitment. So, and in our hearts, whether you're going to make it 20 years, you never know. But in the context we were in with youth ministry, we're like, yeah, we need to do this for 20 years if we're really going to see this through. Now, I've got some notes here. I mean, obviously, I've got a lot of stuff. But I'm just going to ramble for a little bit. Is that okay? Okay, so we loved it. We loved youth ministry. It was a lot of work. A couple of years ago, I did something with some youth pastors, and I went through like our youth ministry stats. Like, what are Doug and Donna's stats? You know what I mean? So, and I don't remember the numbers, and it's in here somewhere. I'd have to find it. But it's things like, I think we did 214 camps. Yeah, think about it. Yeah, think about that. We were doing camps all year, every single year. Like all year long. We were doing retreats and camps all year, every year. It never ended for 20 years. I mean, every 6 weeks I was doing another retreat or a camp. And we would have multiple. I mean, honestly, the middle school camps damaged me for life. Like there's we joke about it, but when I look back, I'm like, I can never do that again. I can never, just the smell. You know what I mean? So I'm like in my 50s and I'm still remembering the smells. And I still remember the boys that smelled the worst, because you're like, why can't you shower? Like, what is it? I remember the beginning of every camp. The rule is everybody showers every day. I remember saying that hundreds of times. We did missions trips all over the world, countless. I couldn't even tell you how many. I think one day we calculated how many pizzas we bought. I think it was, and this is sincerely, I think it was like 8,200 pizzas or something like that in the 20 years. And it was like way over 8,000 pizzas. And this is like, and how much money we spent because kids didn't show up with any money. You know what I mean? And we didn't make any money. And so we're like, oh, Johnny needs $2. And back then, everything was $2. You know what I mean? Back then, if you took a kid out, you took him out for a Coke. It was like 59 cents. And today, they're like, Pastor Doug, can we go get a coffee? I was like, well, let me look for $14, So that just tells you a little bit about my life. We started in youth ministry. My wife and I, we had a unique pairing. I think my wife was born in the church. She's a Christian her whole life. Her family really well known in Canada. They actually, there's the church here that the Leach's pastor. What's the name of the church? Okay, so our grandma and grandpa started that church. So that was founded by Hugh and Audrey Lazell. That's that's my wife's grandparents, and Pastor Hugh's in heaven, and Audrey is 96 or 97. We just went to see her. And she just got an award. You don't know these people, but you just flow, act like you do. I don't know. She just got an award from the president of Uganda, because they were missionaries. Got an award from the president of Uganda for being the people who brought the gospel to Uganda, Africa. And they planted over 2,000 churches in Africa before they came to Hamilton and started the church, I think. So, and then great grandpa, who's really responsible for this whole movement that we're all a part of. Grandpa Reg, you don't know who he is. Maybe one of you will. I see one person who knows Reg in the back row. He's buried just down the road. And so I actually heard of Hamilton my whole life, but I've never been here. just different places in Canada, but I never made it to Hamilton. So the family's here. But me, I was not a Christian. I grew up in a really broken home. I had a really tough life. I'm from Hawaii originally. And like all of Donna's pastors for 5 generations, her family, they're all pastors. Like everyone in her family is a pastor, a missionary, an apostle. My whole family is in jail. So let's just put those two together, right? Let's just stick them together. You know what I mean? In Hawaii, all my cousins are either in jail or the military, because that's the other option the judge gave them. And so I got radically saved in Seattle at the age of 21. And by the time I was 25, I was married to Donna, and I was going into youth ministry at the age of 26. So it was a very quick turnaround. I mean, God can do things really, really fast if you're really, really responsive. And, to the speed that you can respond is the speed that God can move you forward in your ministry. So this was the youth ministry pairing that God put together, and it kind of worked for us. It worked. We were in a church that had been around for a long, long time. I was able to reach kids that were in the world, in the public schools. And my wife, was a missionary kid from Africa, and she understood church kids. And the two of us together, something just kind of clicked along the way. And it was a really good journey. It was really, really wonderful. And so we've done everything there is in youth ministry. And we've had every stage of youth ministry. We've been through every youth ministry discussion that you could ever have in your entire life. Even if you think you're coming up with it for the first time with your team, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. We've had it, and people had it before us. That's just the reality. The reality is when you get in youth ministry, you just go for it. You go for it and you trust God, and you try to be really smart. So we did it. We did that. We started with 36 kids on a Wednesday night in a big mega church. 36 kids. There should have been 360, but there was 36. And it should tell you something. Don't think about it too long, because you might know my pastor. 36 kids. And when we left on Wednesday nights, we had 2,000. Wow. And we had five services just on Wednesday night. I had to broadcast and simulcast services all over the city. Because once something sparks, it sparks. But you know what? Having something spark in youth ministry is not the goal. So I'm going to give you a couple thoughts quickly. You can write this down. This isn't in my notes. This is where Donna and I believe, like if you were to ask people who know us, you're like, tell me about Doug and Donna. Like, what's their dominant gift? I think that people would say that our gift is pastor. It's not evangelist. It's not prophet, not apostle. Donna and I are pastors. Like, we love people. We love youth. We still do. My daughter is the youth pastor at our church now. And it's really cool watching her kind of do her thing. And she flows in the same flow that we had. She loves the kids. She started during COVID. So, like, our church went through COVID, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so our youth ministry was basically, there was nothing left. So my daughter, she said, well, look, why don't you just let me be the youth pastor? Because we were in transition. She was 19 at the time, 19 or 20, I don't remember. And I was like, well, babe, she's like, Dad, I grew up my whole life in your house. Every day of my life was like a youth ministry seminar. Just let me do it. Okay. So she started at the kitchen table on Zoom during COVID, and she started pastoring kids every single day on Zoom. She has kids in her youth group now that she never met, that she pastored for 2 years during COVID, but she'd never met him in person until, just like a year ago. So, we're pastors, all right? So when I give you these few thoughts, it's coming from the heart of a pastor. It's not coming from the heart of an evangelist. It's like you get an evangelist and they're going to be like, you didn't change the world. They know every statistic. 80% of all people who come to the Lord Jesus Christ come to the Lord Jesus Christ under the age of 21. And so if you're not going for this next generation, you're not doing your job. You're letting the whole generation go to hell. You're like, I don't know. I got 5 kids. So you're getting this from the heart of a pastor, okay? Number one, youth ministry means pastor who God gave you.
That's good.
If you can't pastor who he gave you, you won't be able to pastor who he sends you. Most youth pastors are constantly, and again, growth is important. Everybody wants to grow. But there's a bunch of kids that just need pastors. And if you can pastor, if you can be a good shepherd over the people, the young people that he has assigned to you, that's the testing ground for the future. And Donna and I started with 36. And those 36 young people are still our friends today. And they'll never have, and nobody will ever have the place that they have in our hearts. And because they were there in the beginning. So you got a pastor who you have in front of you. You will hone your skills as a pastor. You will hone your skills by pastoring the kids that God gave you. And it's really important because you have to pastor them equally. It's really hard to pastor kids equally, especially if you like one, but you don't really like the other one. Or the other one is like really hard to deal with, you know. Again, if you were in my first session, this is just a continuation of me saying things that I probably shouldn't say, but there's no difference. I had kids that were really difficult. I had kids that were really easy. And then I also had kids that, you know, that had issues all the time and we're constantly pastoring them. And then we had kids that had no issues and they ended up getting neglected because they were doing well. And so the kids grow up and they're doing really well. They're like, I never had a youth pastor. Like, what do you mean you never had a youth pastor? How would you? They're like, yeah, well, you spent all your time with all the kids that had all these problems. I didn't have any problems. And so you never talked to me for 4 years or 5 years or 6 years, right? And so learning how to pastor the ones that are right in front of you, you know, that is the testing ground for pastoring. So we had kids that are in full-time ministry. We have kids that are all over the world now. But our pastoring was made eyeball to eyeball with them, sitting there having conversations with them and pastoring them. And then when other kids came, that was great. And then there was a certain point where we couldn't do that with every kid. But the kids that we'd done it with in the beginning, they knew our hearts, and all of a sudden they just did what we did. And then next thing I knew, we were at 100 kids. And then you do that again, and then you change your strategy because now it's not the same. But then you're at 200 kids. And then one day you wake up and there's a couple of thousand. And you're like, how does this even work? You don't know how it worked. It worked because the first 36 got every day of my life. I poured myself into 36 kids. And now they're all leading whole groups of small groups. And every one of them picked a high school campus. And they just went after a high school campus all by themselves. But they didn't go in thinking that they're the best thing in the world. They went in like shepherd looking at sheep. Okay? So you got a pastor who God sends you. Really, really important. Let me tell you one of the hardest kids I ever had to pastor. His name is Micah, or Valen. Now, he has something called Asperger's syndrome. I don't know if you're familiar with Asperger's. Asperger's is a form of autism. And he was like the toughest kid I had, period. There was never a day where he didn't cause me problems. There was never a day where he wasn't in trouble. And I wish I could tell you, like, I don't have a lot of time. I don't even know what time it is. I don't even know where I am. 11:30, 8? How much time do I have? Pastor, how much time do I have?
I think till quarter after.
We'll just order 8,000 pizzas and stay here all day.
Just 12:15.
Okay, so Micah was always a problem. He'd stand up in the middle of the service and he'd start talking to people and he'd get upset and get mad and yell at people and walk out. And he was in love with one of the other youth pastors, a girl. He was in love with her. He was convinced he was going to marry her someday. And his name was Micah, but until she looked at him one day and said, Micah, we're never going to be married. I'm already married. And we're never going to be married. And so he changed his name to Valen because Valen is half of Valentine and she broke his heart. So his heart was cut in two. So he changed his name to Valen for the rest of his life. And he tattooed a blue teardrop under his left eye because of what he did to her. And this is what every day was like for me with Valen. Every single day of my life was like Valen. Fast forward 6 years. Middle school and high school, grade 8 through grade 12. Fast forward, I did everything I could do for this kid. And his senior year, I felt like I was failing. And so instead of complaining about it, I'm exasperated. I don't know what to do. So I thought, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get a book on Asperger's. And I'm going to go on a deep dive in Asperger's. And so I spent like a month reading everything I could read about his condition. What it all boiled to was a Wednesday night at youth, and I walk in, and he stands there, and he's staring at me. And I know from my research that if I say something to him, he's going to answer me, but it might take a few minutes. And so I thought, it's on. Micah, Valen, how's it going, man? How you doing? And it was on. It was like the greatest staring contest in history. I stared at him. A full minute went by, and he just stared at me. Another minute went by. He just stared at me. Another minute went by. I just took a deep breath, and I just settled in, stared at him. About 3 minutes, 4 minutes goes by. He takes a breath. He goes, I'm doing pretty good. I said, that's great. So what are you doing this weekend? I asked him, what are you doing lately? And as I'm asking him, why did I do that? Because you're talking 10 minutes, and minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes goes by. He goes, I'm just gonna play video games. All right, so now I'm 8, 9, 10 minutes into this, and that's only conversation we've had. I said, well, listen, man, I love you, appreciate you. I'm proud to be your pastor. I gave him a hug. He leaves. 2 things happened. At the end of the year, I was having a conversation with some kids who were telling Donna and I, we love you guys best. I said, why is it? Why do you love us? Like, what did we do? You said we did. What did we do? And you know what they brought up? Oh, there was a group of us who a few months ago, we all stood there and watched you talk to Valen. And we all watched you. It makes me emotional. We watched you stand there and talk to this kid that has caused you problems for 8 years. And you just stared at him and you waited for his answer. And we all stood there with bated breath, waiting to see how long your conversation. And when it was all over, we all went out to Red Robin and we talked about how we had the best youth pastor in the world. Wow. That was half of it. And the other half is the next week I got a phone call from his mom. His mom comes in, she's bawling. I was like, oh no, what did I do? She said, on Wednesday night, for the first time in 8 years, Valen came home and said, Mom, Pastor Doug is my pastor. Aww. And I never had another problem. So my point in telling you this is that if you don't pastor who God brings you, if you're always trying to pastor, and I want kids to get saved, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, if you don't pastor who God pastors, who God sends you, you'll never handle the rest of them the way you think it's going to go. We got to grow our youth ministry by getting the popular kids saved, because then they'll bring all your friends, all their friends. No, get everybody saved and just be a really good shepherd. So like if I look back on youth ministry and I could say just one thing, I would say just pastor your kids with all of your heart and don't worry. You have been assigned a group of lambs. And you need to become a lamb expert. The pastors, they get sheep. You get lambs. Sheep are dumb enough. Lambs are dumb and happy. You know what I mean? Like, they're dumb and happy. So you are a lamb specialist. You need to pastor your kids with all of your heart. And you need to become a lamb specialist. Okay, now I'll segue here to say this. There's only one place in the whole Bible. This is for everybody. There's only one place in the entire Bible where Jesus talks about how to be a pastor. There's only one place. And you've all heard the phrase, the good shepherd, right? Well, it comes from John chapter 10. John chapter 10 is the only place in Scripture where Jesus talks about how to be a good pastor. And for some reason, people just miss it. Like, they go through the chapter and they never go back and go, oh, wait, this is my actual job description. You know what I mean? Like, this is the only place that he talks about it. So maybe what we'll do for the next few minutes is, in the light of becoming a lamb specialist, let me just give you some of John chapter 10. Can we do that? Okay, John chapter 10. I would encourage you just as like a Bible study for yourself. Go through John chapter 10 sometime, read it, and just mark all the things that are supposed to be for a good shepherd. Like what does a good shepherd do? Okay. So I'll just start to read and we'll talk, okay? Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber, right? So we don't want to be a thief and a robber, so that means that we have to go through the door. So what is the door? People who go through the door are people who, so this is just me, I'm just kind of rambling, okay? People who go through the door are people who are under authority. You realize that these aren't your kids, they belong to the parents, and then they belong to your pastors, and then they belong to you third. So you got to remember, you're not in first position, you're in third position. Okay? So the door is important. The door is faithfulness. People come in all the time over the fence. Youth ministry is famous for having over the fence people who come in and they want to pastor your kids, they want to impress your kids, they want your kids to think they're the greatest thing on planet Earth, but they come in and they end up kind of not being there for your kids in the end, because the only one who's really going to do it is the pastor. So you got to go through the door. I call it the gate, the gate. And you want to go through that gate, the gate of faithfulness, the gate of hard work, the gate of just lots of no sleep, and the gates of smells, and the gates of, this is the gate. This is youth ministry. You're a lamb specialist, right? So then you think about the gate versus the fence, people who climb in over the top. Like youth ministry, while you're in it, and I understand it can take you somewhere. I mean, you may not do it forever. I did it a long time. That's pretty rare. But youth ministry is a couple of things that it's not. Number one, youth ministry is not a stepping stone. So people who look at youth ministry like it's a stepping stone, they're not going through the gate. They're not going through the door. They're climbing in over the gate or over the wall somewhere, because they may not be there because it's just a stepping stone. Number two, youth ministry, you shouldn't do it because you just want to have a position. Some people just want to be the youth pastor because they want a position. Some of the best youth pastors I've ever known were never on staff at the church. I know one mom whose youth ministry started with like 30 kids. She ended up with like 600 kids. She was over 50 when she started. And I went to speak for her, and I was like, can you just explain to me what happened, what's happening right now? She's like, well, there was no youth pastor. I knew there was a bunch of kids out there, in our church. And I said, well, how did you do this? She said, I didn't do anything. She said, I'm just the mom. I'm just mom. So mom just came in and took over. I don't need money. I don't need an office. I don't need a title. I don't need anything. Mom just walked in and started momming everybody. And they ended up having this massive revival. And I still know her today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see her next weekend at their church. But yeah, she didn't want a position. She's like, I don't want a position. I don't want to get paid. I just want to be mom. So another one, youth ministry. You shouldn't go into ministry because you want your financial needs met. Right? It doesn't work that way. There's this idea out there, I'll get on staff at the church and then I'm going to get paid. Well, yeah. Sure. Get paid. But if you think if it's for money, it's just a weird thing. You'd be surprised how many people just want to do it because they want to get paid. Hey, I serve so much. When am I going to get paid? Another reason to not do youth ministry, just go through the door. Don't climb in some other way. Is don't do it so that you can be close to other leaders. I know a lot of people who've done it because they want to be close to their pastor or close to somebody, and they just want to be in the proximity of leaders because they have this hunger to be a leader, and they just want to. But it's not about you. It's not about you. It's not about you. It's about the kids, right? So another one is you shouldn't do youth ministry out of guilt or pressure. This doesn't apply to everybody, but once in a while there's nobody to do it. The pastor says you need to do this, and you're like, I don't want to do this. I don't feel this, but I feel guilty, right? That's not a good enough reason to do it. You got to work through those kinds of things, because if you're showing up to do your thing with guilt, the kids sense that. Trust me. You don't want to have a hidden agenda. You don't want to have a sense of entitlement. I'm just throwing things out. People who, some people thought my daughter was just going to be the youth pastor because she was my daughter. And, that just happens in church until they got to know her and they realized that my daughter is the least entitled person that you'd ever meet in your life. And a matter of fact, if you really want to get an earful, if you really want to hear her greatest sermon, don't ever accuse her of being entitled. Trust me, you may not survive. I mean, it's like, no, because she paid the price. She went through the door, for this whole thing. And let me just turn off his ringer. There we go. So you don't want to, or if you have something to prove, if you have something to prove. So these are just thoughts about the difference between the door and the gate. So verse 1 basically says, he who does not enter by the door, but climbs in another way, they're a thief and a robber, because in the end, you end up robbing the kids of what they really need, which is a pastor and a shepherd. Let's go to verse 3. To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls out his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. Okay, so think of Valen right now. Think of Micah. The door. So if you go through the door, I'll open the door for you. Come on in. Here's the lambs. Help me take care of the lamb. Learn their name, and Micah will call you. He'll say that you're his pastor because you know his name. You know who he is. You know who it is that's under your care. 1 Peter chapter 5. Okay? Let's just keep going. Verse 4. And when he brings them out, brings out his sheep, all his sheep, the Bible says in verse 4, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, again, because they know his voice. So you go first. You bring them out, but it says all, the first and the last kid. That the shepherd is responsible. Have you ever taken a kid on a trip or a group on a trip, and you count just to make sure they're all there? Like 14, 15, 16, 17, where's number 18? We're missing 18. I counted 18. Everybody's like, well, who is 18? Like, nobody can even remember who 18 is. That happened one time. Nobody even knew. They felt so bad for the kid. I was like, sorry, nobody even knew who you were. Where is 18? He's in the bathroom, right? So we're responsible for the first kid and the last kid. Okay? So I'm just trying to share. He goes before them, verse 4 again, and the sheep follow. So, be an example. He goes before his sheep. You want to make sure you're leading the sheep in the right direction. You don't want to lead them in the wrong direction. Leadership is a responsibility. Don't do it if you don't want to live up to the responsibility. Just don't do it if you just want to argue all the time about theology and what rights you have and what it causes. What does it mean to cause somebody to stumble, and you want to go into the Greek and you want to debate everything. Just don't do youth ministry. Just do something else where you can talk all day and not impact kids' lives. But if you're going to do it, go before them and just be a really good example. Love them, take care of them, have good conversations, respect their parents, even if their parents are kind of crazy and part of it's their fault. Respect them anyways. Just love them. I mean, this is real. This is real. You're going to have kids. Here's what you're going to do. I don't understand parents these days. You're like 19. You're like, well, of course you don't. You know what I mean? Like, and sometimes parents, you know this, that like, you're like, wow, I feel so bad for this kid. But if you don't respect their parents, they won't respect their parents. And so you just got to be an example all the way through, because you go before them. Verse 4, okay. What else could I say? For they know his voice. Verse 4, they know his voice. 10, verse 4. Know is that word. Think of Valen again. Know is the word for trust. It's the word for trust. So like, they trust your voice. So as you do all these things, kids will start to establish trust. They'll trust you. Another story. I had a young man. He actually, incredible story actually. I love this guy. He was a big problem. He was a big problem in youth ministry. He's a big guy, football player, big guy. Big guy. I'm trying to remember how big. 6'6", 250 pounds as a high school freshman. Big boy. And our youth ministry, when it really started to grow, we had all kinds of crazy things happen. Well, first of all, we're in the hood. And so it was like every day, it was like taking your life into your own hands. Like, I'm not even joking. It was so awesome. One time, this guy just got in a fight right in the middle of my sermon. He just started beating some other kid up, And this is a long journey with this kid. Like, you're angry, and blah, blah, blah. On and on and on. So And I had done everything I could do to love this kid. But I said, here's the deal. You can't come anymore. Because like you're really large and you're angry. And that other kid is going to sue your family. And I was responsible. They could sue me. I said, look, here's the deal. I love you, but we're taking a break from youth group on Wednesday nights. You know what I mean? That kid weighed all of about 90 pounds. And you weighed 250. And you like held him in the air. and I was like, it's time to take a break. You know what I mean? And I looked at him and I said, but here's the deal. I will meet with you every Thursday for 2 hours. Every Thursday. You can't come on Wednesday night because you messed up. But on Thursday, I will meet with you every 2 hours. For 2 hours, every Thursday. And he said, let me think about it. And he didn't do it. Fast forward, 10 years. I moved to Denver, Colorado. And I'm looking out over the audience. I don't know how long we were in. There's a couple hundred people in the church. And I see this big giant dude walk in with a cowboy hat. And he walks in, and his wife's with him, and his 2 little boys. And I thought I recognized him, like just a big guy. You can't not see him. And he comes walking up at the end, and he's crying. And he says, hey, look, do you remember me? And I was like, oh my gosh, I do. I said, yeah, I never saw you again after that meeting we had. He said, well, there's something I want you to know. He said, you told me I couldn't come back anymore to the youth because, I got in that fight and I was a problem all year. And I was like, yeah. He's like, but every time you told me that you still loved me and you would meet with me and I never showed up, but I know you did. He said, I want you to know for the last 10 years, I've been on this journey and now I'm saved. I'm a Christian. I have a Christian family. I met my wife. I got my 2 little boys and he brought them up to meet me and he said, I'm serving Jesus right now because of you. Because even though I didn't like you, I knew I could trust you. That was what he said to me. I didn't like you, but I knew I could trust you. Powerful. And he was in our church for years and years, and now he moved to Phoenix, and he's just a wonderful guy, but trust. So verse 4 again, for they know his voice. They know, which means to trust. All right, verse 5. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but they'll flee from him. John chapter 10, verse 5. For they do not know the voice of a stranger. Part of our job in youth ministry is to also identify the voices of strangers. We just got to protect our kids. I could go into all kinds of stuff there, but we got to watch out for them and protect them and make sure that they're not getting caught up in things that they don't need to get caught up in. And you get that. But our job is to protect them from the wolf, Let's go to verse 9. I am the door, and if anyone enters by me, he will be saved. And go in and out and find pasture. And the thief does not come except to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and life more abundantly, right? So our job is to provide life. Life-giving sermons and life-giving activities and life-giving times together, because the enemy wants to take life. So we got to make sure that we're going in to impart life in every way that we can. Teach them, nourish them, love them. Give them great experiences. Find sermons that, I used to say this, I used to preach the same sermons every single year, but give it a different name. Because there are certain things that all young people need, right? They all need it. Every young person needs to learn about worship. Let's give you one, right? Worship, or the presence of God, or friendship, or relationships, or whatever it is. So every year, I would take the same sermons, I would give them a new name, and I would repackage them a little bit because I wanted them to get the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. And that's why I always preach the series, by the way. I preach very few one-off sermons because a one-off sermon is an introduction. But if you want to see something birthed in them that they take, you got to do it in a series. They got to hear it 6 times in a row, 8 times in a row, 10 times in a row. You know what I mean? So because you're helping lambs. We're not feeding sheep. We're feeding lambs that just need to be controlled, right? So you just got to kind of go for it and give them life over and over and over again. And then I will probably just stop here for a second and just say that youth ministry is and was the greatest season of my life. with all the jokes, my heroes are youth pastors. I had a guy one time, he came to see me, and he sat down in my office, and he said, hey, Pastor Doug, it's really nice to meet you. I have a proposition for you. I said, okay, what is it? He goes, you guys do such a great job, blah, blah, blah. He says, I run the greatest mentoring, largest big brother mentoring program for youth in all of America. We're number one. And you're the kind of guy that we want to come and be one of our mentors. And he said, and he's just going off his sales speech like, I don't have time for that. So I said, look, I'm so sorry, but you're wrong. And he goes, what do you mean I'm wrong? He goes, I know who you are. I said, you're not the largest mentoring program for youth in America by far. You're number 2, and everybody knows it, and you should just admit it. And you shouldn't sell yourself this way. He got so ticked at me. Like, he was like, what are you talking about? I know him. I said, he goes, who? And I said, youth pastors. I said, there's 500,000 youth pastors in America. You've got 2,000. I said, so I'm sorry, but I'm a part of the greatest group of youth mentors in America. And you're second by thousands and thousands. And so if you don't mind, I'm going to spend my time with them. Yeah, I know, right? That's my problem. That's my issue. That's my issue in life. That's why my wife prays for me all day. All right? The entire theme here is pastor the kids that you have.
That's good.
So that 10 years from now, one of them will walk up to you at a church somewhere and say, I'm serving Jesus because of you.
So good.
You won't have the reputation, where it's like you talked to them, but you didn't talk to me. You spent time with the easy kids, but you didn't spend time with the hard kids. You spent all your time with the hard kids, but you didn't talk to the easy kids. And remember Valen, probably my greatest moment in youth ministry that moved me the most is when I committed to pastor that kid and the impact that it had on all the other young people in the youth group who I didn't know were watching me, right? Because it'd be very easy for me to and I don't know. I have this thing in here that I used to do. I still do it once in a while, but it's called starting from ground zero. And I talk about how to build a youth ministry. Can I just be honest with you? All of you already know this. You don't think you do, but you know that stuff. You love them, you gather them, and you disciple them. You want to know all of youth ministry? All of youth ministry is this: lead them, gather them, and disciple them. Lead, gather, disciple. That's like everything I ever did. Lead, gather, disciple. Lead, make a decision. We're going to have a retreat. And we're going to be in the hole for it. Just lead. We're going to get them together. I'm making the decision. Make the decision to do something for your young people. Just lead them. Make a decision to be a leader. Get in the van. We're going here. We're going to the water park. We're having youth ministry. We're starting Wednesday nights. We're going to do Sunday night, whatever it is. We're making a decision. Leader, gather them. Young people have to be gathered together. They're a flock. They're not an individual sheep. They can't be separate. They can't be alone. Lead them, gather them, and once you got them in a room, disciple them. And if you can do those 3 things over a long period of time and be a really good shepherd, it's going to work out. Okay? So I know it's not very organized, but that's what I feel. That's what I think. Okay, I have 5 minutes. Questions, because the next session, I'm only going to speak for 10 minutes, and all we're going to do is Q&A for 30 minutes. We're just going to do Q&A. I'm just going to, whatever you guys want to talk about. I don't even care what it is. But right now, any questions? Yes, sir.
Kind of related to what you're talking about this morning. How do you find a balance between giving your time to those kids?
Yeah.
We've had times in youth where influxes of not safe kids.
Yeah.
Doing coke in the bathrooms.
Yeah. Oh, we had that.
When we pour out time to those kids, the relationship grows. But then the church kids leave because they're mad that hey, you're not spending anything. How do you balance that and vice versa? With the church kids that you want to raise up, you want to spend time with kids that, like you're saying, they need that time too.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. No, I'm just joking. I don't know. So I lived that, right? There's a show on TV called, it's like about crazy addictions or something.
Wait, my crazy addiction.
One of those shows.
My strange addiction.
Some TLC channel?
Yeah, it's that one. It's that one, or it's the one about. It was that one of those two. There's one about addictions, and anyways, so a few years right after I'm in youth ministry. Blah blah blah. Get down the road. I turn on TV one day, and I turn on that TV show, and I see our church, and I'm like, hold up, what? And there was a kid in our youth group who was a total coke addict. I knew he'd done drugs. I didn't know that it was as bad. He almost killed. I didn't know anything that was happening in his life. And the whole story was about this kid. And they came to youth group, and I didn't even see him. They hid with their cameras. They followed him into the bathroom while he was doing coke in the bathrooms. And all of this thing was on television on that TV show. For real. And I was like, oh, and our whole church went bonkers, man. Our whole church went bonkers, And they interviewed his parents. They did this whole thing without telling us. I remember feeling so guilty. You know what I mean? That you're sitting there watching TV and you feel so guilty. Like, what did I do wrong? How did I miss it? Like, this is on national TV. It's on TLC. I'm like, holy Father, what in the world am I doing right now? Like, then I get a call from the pastor. Did you know about this? I'm like, Pastor, did you not help that family? Pastor, yeah, really hard. Okay, so at the end of the day, you're only responsible. I'm not saying you don't need to work hard. At the end of the day, you're only responsible for what the Lord gives you. And they're responsible, right, for their life to a degree. Like, you can't save everybody. So I have to look at it a different way, because your question is super valid and really hard to answer because you get kids everywhere. I had a third of my kids were public school, a third of my kids were private school because we had a school, and a third of my kids were homeschooled. So just those fights alone, people, come on, you know what I'm saying? Like, just those arguments alone. So, and we had kids in the bathroom doing drugs. We had kids bringing guns. I had parents telling us that we're the worst youth pastors in the world because we won't kick out all the bad kids. I won't kick them out. You know what I mean? My favorite youth ministry night of all time, in one night, I show up, a kid gets really sick from a drug overdose. And now we've got ambulances and fire trucks outside of the church. People are coming in, and I'm like, but we have at that time we had 300-400 kids. I'm like, we're having youth group. Like, we got to figure this out. So they take the kid, and then all of a sudden, here come the cops. Here comes SWAT team. There's a kid in the bathroom with a gun. This kid brought a gun. He thought it would be funny, and so now all of a sudden, I'm like, there's a kid with a gun in there, and he's getting arrested. And I'm like, we're having youth group. I'm going to preach my message on purity. In the name of Jesus. So my favorite night. So I'm preaching. So I'm in our big sanctuary at the time. You've been there 100 times, Pastor. I'm right in the middle. I'm looking through this big auditorium. And I preached my entire message with about a 6'6", 300-pound SWAT guy with a sniper rifle while I'm preaching, just sitting there just going, that was good, man. And like a full-on sniper rifle while I'm preaching, right? Let me tell you, those kids, when he showed up, like, it was the best service ever. Kids were just like, so where I go with this is I go back to, man, I hear your question, because I feel like I failed so many times. But at the same time, I'm like, no, Lord, I did the best that I could before you. And I have this, I'm forgetting where the address is right now. But there's a verse in the Bible where Paul talks about living your life circumspectfully. Okay? What that means is, this goes for everybody. So it's not like, the same answer would be like if you were to say, how do you balance ministry and family? Or how do you balance marriage and ministry? Or how do you balance, the way that you do it is when Paul said live circumspectly, you think of your life like a circle, Okay? The call of God that is on all of your lives never changes. It never leaves. It doesn't go anywhere. It goes with you through the seasons. So you place, instead of like putting life on a scale, how do you balance? Because as soon as you say it's a scale, then when this part goes down, that means that you're disappointing something over here. So everything now is in competition with each other. It's a balance. This one gets this one doesn't get anything. So instead of thinking of ministry as a balance, think of it as a circle. Your calling is a circle, and you stand in the middle of the circle. And you look around the circle, and you ask God to give you the grace to handle everything as it's coming. And you're not comparing or balancing anything, because there's no balance in ministry. And I know there's a lot of messages out there right now about balance and live work, balance and all this stuff. Okay, tell that to Paul. You know what I mean? Just go through what happened to Paul. I got beaten, I got shipwrecked, I got bit by a snake. You know what I mean? And then he just went and got everybody saved. So there is nobody in Scripture. There's not a single balanced Scripture, but there's circumspectful verses in the Bible. You're called of God. You got to take care of your family. So that means if your family needs you, you got to make a hard decision. Make it. But don't blame the church. So what happens too with balance of family and ministry is like when people say, what about, how do you balance church and family? I don't, because then if my family's not doing well, then if it's between church and family, then who do I blame? Yeah. I blame the church. My kids have never heard me say a negative word about the church, any of my leaders, and they're in their 20s now. My son's 19. But they've never heard me speak negatively about anyone, even when my leaders hurt me. Because if it's only two, family and church, if family's not going well, then who do they blame? Well, they're going to blame who they heard me talk about. You know what I mean? So it's more circumspectful. Life and ministry is a circle, and you get all these things coming at you, and the Bible says, get in the middle, live circumspectfully, and handle the call of God, and make the decisions that you got to make. It's what you're describing is one of the hardest things in youth ministry. And I know that was like a super long answer. Forgive me, I'm sorry. But it's a tough one. It's tough. Super tough. Yeah.
How do you deal when people tell you like really hard things? Like, do you have training for that? Like mental health and like addictions and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a process. So, and our youth team, like all of our youth and young adults, our whole church is trained. So we know when a kid says this is the response. If the kid confesses this is how we handle it. And over the years, we just made decisions to not wing it anymore. Because something happened in about the year 2000. Something happened, and everybody started getting sued for everything in the world. You breathe wrong, you get sued. So we shifted how we handle those things. So yeah, so we have counselors, we have all of the legal stuff. We talk about it all the time. And yeah, we're very careful with it. I don't know if that answers your question, but if you had a specific one, I could maybe speak to that. But
yeah, I just meant more like how do you personally deal with when people tell you certain things? Does it affect your person?
It does. Yeah. Probably all of you, right, have had somebody tell you something, and it gets really heavy. It's really heavy. So part of the job of a pastor or a pastoral leader is to carry things for other people. And there's a grace that comes with that, okay? But at the same time, there's this thing called differentiation. It's a kind of a big word, psychology term, differentiation. Do you know that word? Oh, okay. And what it means is, why are you laughing? No, just throw that. But what it means is that, you know who you are, you know what your boundaries are, you know how much you can carry, and you don't go beyond that. Because if you go beyond that, then everybody suffers. So what do? You learn to not carry things alone. So if a kid tells you something really hard, you can't just carry that alone. You know, it's easy to say if a kid confesses something that's legal or strange, whatever, you're just like, listen, you got to know something. If you tell me this, it's probably not going to be a secret, but I need you. Like, don't ever use a secret to get information because now you've lied. You know, and I don't know what it's like here in Canada, but if I do that, I get in big trouble in the States, right? So you say, no, if you tell me this, I'm probably going to tell us because I care about you so much, but I'll walk you through it, you know. We'll go through it. But sometimes you got to share that. You have to know what your limits are, where your boundaries are, and then sometimes you have to, if it's so big, you have to pass it off or share it with other leaders, because that's the only way to carry some things. You know, it's just hard. It's hard stuff. Yeah.
Can I add something to it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is Elliot, by the way.
Hi.
My executive pastor, former young adult pastor, ballerina.
Dance ministry?
Yeah.
No, I think that's a great question because I think pastors is a weight that you feel, and there's another psychology term called transference. When people are dumping stuff on you all the time. It starts to weigh you down, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. You have to be pastored too. You have to have people that are helping you spiritually, mentally, emotionally, because you just can't carry all that, like Pastor Doug said, alone.
Yeah.
And not just in a legal standpoint, but in your own spiritual standpoint. You got to have people that pastor you and walk with you alongside the journey. Because you'll hear some heavy stuff.
And at the end of the day, everybody's got to make their own decision. You can only do your part. And I know it's super cliche, but you're not their savior. And youth pastors, almost more than anybody else, have this like savior mentality because you want every kid to just be, have an amazing life. And it's really tricky. So, good question. Okay, we're done. Okay.